So, look around you right now. Seriously, wherever you are listening to this deep dive, just take a second to, scan your immediate environment.
Yeah, take stock of what's there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe you see, like, your dog curled up asleep on the rug, or maybe you're staring at your laptop screen, or there's a houseplant sitting in the corner.
We're just a total stranger walking down the street outside your window.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I want you to ask yourself a question that it sounds simple on the surface, but it's actually kind of terrifying when you really dig into it. Which of those things has an inner life?
Right.
Like, which of them is truly experiencing this exact moment?
It's basically the ultimate locked room mystery, isn't it? I mean, we are all essentially trapped inside our own skulls.
Totally.
The philosopher David Hume famously tried to look inside his own mind back in the 1700s. And he wrote that he only found this rapid succession of images, momentary passions, just a perpetual flux.
Just a flux. Wow.
Yeah, he couldn't even find a solid self in there. But then when we look at others, whether it's the dog, the stranger, or, the laptop, we don't even get that flux. We just get a surface, a shell.
Just the outside packaging.
Exactly. We are entirely locked out of the minds of every other entity on this planet.
And so our mission today on this deep dive is to try and basically pick the lock on that door.
Yeah, a tall order.
Very.
Yeah.
But we're going to explore the evolution of consciousness itself. Like how the feeling of being alive slowly crept into existence on our planet over hundreds of millions of years.
Which is a fascinating timeline.
It really is. And maybe even more importantly, we're going to look at the glitchy, deeply biased, and just fascinating psychological software that you and I use every single day.
To map the minds of animals, machines, and the people around us.
Right. Because deciding who or what have a mind isn't just some, late-night dorm room philosophy debate.
Not at all. It is the core mechanism that dictates our morality, our physical survival, and very soon, our future alongside artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it has massive real-world stakes. But before we jump into the oceans to see how the very first minds evolved, we really need to look at how we categorize the minds around us right now.
The modern framework.
Yeah. There's a researcher named Daniel Wegner who wrote this brilliant book called The Mind Club. And he found that we don't just look at a dog and a rock and say, mind and no mind.
Right. It's not a single on or off switch.
Exactly. It's not binary.
Far from it. Wegner and his colleagues ran these massive surveys basically asking people to evaluate all sorts of entities. Frogs, babies, corporations, robots themselves.
And the data was wild.
It's totally counterintuitive. We don't have a single sliding scale for consciousness. We actually perceive minds along two entirely separate fundamental dimensions: experience and agency.
I found this framework so helpful because it completely changes how you look at the world. So experience is basically the capacity to feel.
Right.
It's the ability to experience pain, pleasure, fear, hunger, joy. It's the vulnerable, receptive part of existing.
It's what a mind feels like from the inside.
From the inside, yeah.
Think of experience as the inputs. It's the sensory surface area that the universe acts upon. Agency, on the other hand, is the capacity to do.
To act.
Exactly. It is the ability to plan, remember, exert self-control, communicate, and act upon the world. It's what a mind looks like from the outside, the outputs.
Okay, let's unpack this. So experience is the vulnerable feeler, and agency is the thinking doer.
That's a great way to put it.
And the way Wegner plots this is, it's like a bouncer at an incredibly exclusive nightclub. Let's call it the Mind Club.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. But this bouncer isn't checking your ID for your age. He's looking for those two specific dimensions, and your answers determine what room you get thrown into.
And those rooms represent the core pillars of human morality.
Yes. So the bouncer looks at you and asks question 1, can you feel pain? Do you have experience?
Right.
And if your answer is yes, the bouncer sends you straight to the VIP lounge of moral protection. We look at you, we see a vulnerable feeler, and we decide you have moral rights. We are not allowed to harm you.
But then the bouncer asks question 2. Did you do that on purpose? Do you have agency?
The doer question.
Exactly. If the answer is yes, you don't go to the VIP lounge. You go to the interrogation room of moral responsibility.
Oh, man.
You are a thinking doer, which means you can be blamed for your actions or praised for them. You are on the hook for what you do.
I just love plotting different things on this map to see how the bouncer treats them. Like, Normal adult humans are in the top right corner.
High experience, high agency.
Right. We feel pain and we make plans, but then look at where we put dogs or even like human babies.
This is where it gets interesting. People consistently rate babies and dogs as having extremely high experience. They clearly feel joy, they cry when they are in pain.
Yeah, obviously.
But we rate them as having very low agency. A 6-month-old baby is not scheming. A dog is not, planning for its retirement.
Right. So the bouncer sends the baby to the VIP lounge of moral protection.
Yeah.
We will do absolutely anything to keep the baby from feeling pain. But if a baby accidentally scratches your cornea with its fingernail, which happens, we don't put the baby on trial.
No, we don't hold them morally responsible because
Right.
they lack the agency.
But the truly revealing part of Wegner's map is the opposite corner,
Yes. High agency, low experience.
the interrogation room corner. This is where we put robots, artificial intelligence, massive corporations like Google, and, God,
It's such a wild grouping.
it really is.
But the grouping is incredibly revealing about human psychology. People perceive an entity like God or a multinational corporation as having immense power to act, to plan, to execute.
That's massive agency.
Right. But we do not perceive God or Google as feeling hunger, fear, or physical pain. We give them practically zero experience.
Which means we hold them responsible for bad things like we sue corporations, we get angry at God, but we don't really worry about hurting their feelings.
Exactly.
To drive home how wildly this dictates our behavior, Wegner proposes this incredibly vivid thought experiment: the baby versus the robot.
It's a stark scenario.
Yeah. So you imagine a highly advanced humanoid robot is holding a human infant. Suddenly, the robot's servos glitch out, and it's about to drop the baby off a third-story balcony.
Terrifying.
Truly. And you are standing there with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
The only way to stop the baby from falling is to take the bat and completely obliterate the robot. Just smash it to pieces. You do it.
Every single person says yes. Without a fraction of a second's hesitation, you shatter the million-dollar machine to save the infant.
Yeah, nobody sheds a tear for the robot.
But then Wegner asks the follow-up questions, which are the real point of the experiment. First, who do we protect from harm?
The baby.
The baby. Why? Because the baby is a vulnerable feeler. It has experience. Second, who do we hold responsible for the whole mess?
We blame the robot, or, the software engineer who coded the robot.
Right. We want to dismantle the machine or sue the company. Why? Because the robot and its creators possess the agency. We give moral rights to experience and moral responsibility to agency.
It's just baked into us.
It is. This dichotomy is deeply ancient. It essentially mirrors our most primitive concepts of the universe: the passive and the active, the victim and the aggressor.
Wow.
Our entire perception of good and evil is essentially just subconscious math based on these two dimensions. Immorality in the human brain occurs when an entity with high agency intentionally inflicts pain on an entity with high experience.
Okay, but wait, I have to push back here.
Sir, go ahead.
If our mental bouncer is deciding who gets rights and who gets blamed purely based on external cues, like a dog whimpering or a baby crying or a robot's mechanical arms twitching, aren't we incredibly easy to fool?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're stuck on the outside of the locked room, right? Just
Dog.
looking at shadows under the door, guessing if there's a real mind in there.
We are constantly fooled. Our bouncer is wildly susceptible to being hacked, and we will absolutely dive into the specific glitches of that mind-reading software later on.
Good, because I have so many questions about that.
But before we judge the bouncer too harshly, we have to understand why he relies on those specific cues. We have to look at the evolutionary history.
Right.
If our modern brains are so obsessed with finding agency and experience, we have to ask how and when did those two traits actually get built into the biology of this planet?
Which takes us out of the nightclub and directly into the primordial oceans, literally hundreds of millions of years ago.
Deep time.
Deep time. So there's a philosopher of science and an avid scuba diver named Peter Godfrey-Smith who has written extensively about this. And the first thing he tells us to do is completely throw away the idea of a spark of consciousness.
Yeah, the Hollywood version of evolution always wants a lights-on moment. The ape touches the monolith or lightning strikes the primordial soup, and suddenly a creature opens its eyes and is, aware.
Right, the dramatic cinematic beat.
Exactly. But biology relies on gradualism. Subjective experience, the actual feeling of being alive, didn't pop into existence fully formed.
It's more of a fade-in.
Yes. Godfrey-Smith uses a concept discussed by researchers like Simona Ginsberg and Eva Jablonka, comparing early consciousness to white noise.
See, I actually struggle with that metaphor a bit.
Why is that?
Well, white noise sounds like a broken television to me. It sounds mechanical. If we're talking about a microscopic organism with the first tiny cluster of nerves and it just has a hum of metabolic electricity, does that even count as a feeling?
That's the big question.
Right. At what point on that evolutionary dimmer switch does a physical flinch become the subjective internal feeling of pain?
That is essentially the defining problem in the philosophy of mind. And to even begin answering it, we have to flip our assumptions about why nervous systems evolved in the first place.
Okay.
For decades, the dominant view was what we call the sensory motor view. The idea was that brains evolved primarily to link a sense with an action. You see a piece of food floating by, your brain processes that image and tells your tail to swim toward it.
Sense, then act. It seems perfectly logical.
It does. But Godfrey-Smith points to an alternative theory that is gaining a lot of traction, championed by a researcher named Fred Kaiser.
The action-shaping view.
Exactly. It's called the action-shaping view. And Kaiser argues that early nervous systems weren't actually about high-level sensing of the outside world. They evolved for a much more internal, logistical reason.
Which was?
To pull a multicellular body together.
Wow. So it wasn't about the mind reaching out to understand the universe. It was about the mind reaching in to control the meat it was attached to.
That's a great, slightly gross way to phrase it. Think about a single-celled organism, like a paramecium. It is purely reactive.
Right. It just floats around.
It swims, it bumps into a chemical gradient it doesn't like, the chemical reaction reverses its cilia and it backs up.
Yeah.
There's no coordination required because it's just one cell.
It's solo act.
Exactly. But when animals became multicellular, they faced a massive engineering crisis. How do you get millions of individual cells to act as a single unified entity instead of just a colony of independent blobs?
Right. If you want to actually do something, half your cells can't decide to swim left while the other half swim right. You just rip yourself apart.
Precisely. Nervous systems evolved to create a completely new kind of biological action, muscularly controlled whole-body motion.
Okay, so give me an example of this.
Look at the Canarians. Things like jellyfish, sea anemones, and corals. On the sensory side, they are incredibly primitive. They don't have true eyes. They might just have a few cells that can detect light versus dark, or a simple gravity sensor so they know which way is up.
So very basic inputs.
Very basic. But their massive innovation was the ability to rhythmically contract a bell to swim, or to coordinate a whole row of tentacles to retract and pull prey into a mouth.
So they basically built the agency before they built the experience.
Yes. Kaiser suggests that complex action actually drove the evolution of complex senses.
How does that work?
Well, if you build a nervous system to choreograph the complex movements of thousands of muscle cells, parts of that nervous system must be dedicated to monitoring what the other parts are doing. You need an internal feedback loop.
Right. The right hand needs to know what the left hand is doing.
Exactly. And once you have an internal monitoring system running constantly, any external touch, a predator bumping into you, a change in water temperature that disrupts your internal rhythm is automatically registered by the system.
Oh, wow.
The system, which was built to look inward, can't help but start looking outward.
That makes so much sense. There is this anecdote from Godfrey-Smith's diving that completely crystallized this for me.
The shrimp.
Yes, the banded coral shrimp. So he's underwater watching the shrimp, and these things have incredibly long, spindly arms and pincers, and they take up a huge amount of three-dimensional space around their bodies.
They're very leggy.
Very leggy. And occasionally, because it has so many limbs waving around, a wayward claw will accidentally clamp down on the shrimp's own leg.
And if you're a creature without a sophisticated nervous system, you might just keep crushing your own leg thinking it's food or an enemy.
Right, you just eat yourself. But the shrimp grabs its own leg and then instantly, almost violently, releases it.
It recognizes the mistake.
Yes. It physically recognizes, oh wait, that's me. It demonstrates this tacit physical distinction between self and other.
It's beautiful.
It really is. It's not sitting on a rock writing a memoir about its identity, but its nervous system has definitively mapped out its own boundaries.
And the mechanism behind that realization is profound. In neuroscience, we talk about the difference between reafferents and exafferents.
Okay, those are dense terms. Let's translate those for everyone listening.
Sure. Think of it like a CC on an email.
Okay.
When an animal takes an action, say, moving its eye, the visual scene across its retina shifts dramatically. If the animal didn't know it was the one moving its eye, it would feel like the entire universe just spun around it.
That would be incredibly disorienting.
It would be impossible to survive. That sensory input caused by the outside world is exafference, but that's not what happens. When your brain sends the motor command to move your eye, it simultaneously sends a carbon copy of that command, an efferent copy, to your visual cortex.
Oh, it's like the brain whispering to itself, hey, things are about to get blurry, but ignore it. I'm the one doing it.
Precisely. That internal heads up is reafference. The brain is tracking what it is doing versus what the world is doing to it.
That is so cool.
And the evolution of that simple CC email, the need to filter out your own movements so you can spot the movements of predators, is arguably the dawn of subjectivity.
So just to make sure I'm getting this, the need to act cohesively is what forced the organism to define a boundary between the self and the world.
You've got it perfectly.
So agency literally builds the scaffolding for experience. The ability to act creates the container for the feeling of being a subjective self.
Yes.
And once that container was built, the ocean became an absolute madhouse. Which takes us to the Cambrian Information Revolution about, what, 500 million years ago?
Roughly, yes. It is the most dramatic period of biological innovation in Earth's history.
Because before the Cambrian, the ocean was mostly blind. Creatures were just sort of bumping into each other in the dark, filtering water, maybe sensing shadows.
Very low information environment.
Right. But then eyes evolved. Real image-forming eyes. And suddenly the ocean went from a dark, tactile environment to a brilliantly lit, high-definition arena.
But the environment fundamentally changed. It was no longer just rocks and water currents and temperature gradients. The environment was suddenly full of other minds.
Right. If a 3-foot-long armored predator, like an Amalecaris, is actively looking at you and steering towards you, your simple gravity sensors aren't going to cut it anymore.
Their lunch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to know it's coming, you need to guess its trajectory, and you need to deploy countermeasures. The invention of the eye sparked a massive, brutal evolutionary arms race of mind and behavior.
Every animal became a highly visible, crucial part of another animal's environment. To survive, you didn't just need to move, you needed to perceive, to process, and to outsmart.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next massive leap in this story. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Let's hear it.
Because if we really want to understand how far this Cambrian arms race could push intelligence, we can't just look at our own family tree. Looking at apes and dogs and mice only tells us how our specific hardware works.
Right, it's a sample size of one lineage.
Exactly. We need a control group. We need an independent experiment in the evolution of consciousness to see if there is more than one way to build a genius. And we find that experiment in the cephalopods, the octopus.
The octopus is the closest thing we have to an alien intelligence on Earth.
It really is.
The evolutionary lineage that led to human beings and the lineage that led to the octopus split from each other over 500 million years ago. Our last common ancestor was likely a tiny, blind, flatworm-like creature sliding along the mud at the bottom of the ocean.
That is just wild to think about. Every single thing that makes a mammal smart. Our cerebral cortex, our spinal cord, the specific way our brain is folded, all of that evolved after we split from the octopus.
Completely divergent paths.
Which means the octopus built a high-level intellect using completely fundamentally different hardware. We're talking about a creature with 3 hearts, blue blood that uses copper instead of iron to carry oxygen.
And a nervous system that completely defies how we think a brain should work.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So, the human brain is a centralized command center. It sits in a bony vault in our skull, receiving reports from the body and sending down orders.
Like a CEO in an office.
Exactly. The octopus, however, has a profoundly decentralized nervous system. They have a central brain wrapped around their esophagus, but the vast majority of their nervous system, about 3/5 of their neurons, are distributed throughout their 8 arms.
So the arms aren't just like remote-controlled tools, the arms are actually thinking. The naturalist Cy Montgomery wrote a book called The Soul of an Octopus, and her first-hand accounts of interacting with these creatures are breathtaking.
Her descriptions are incredible.
She goes behind the scenes of the New England Aquarium and plunges her bare arms into a 47-degree saltwater tank to meet an octopus named Athena.
Risk.
Yeah, very cold. And what she describes is not just an animal touching her, she describes being tasted.
Right, because the suckers on an octopus's arms are densely packed with chemoreceptors. They literally taste everything they touch, simultaneously gathering tactile and chemical information.
Athena has 1,600 of these suckers, and each one is powerful enough to lift several pounds, but sensitive enough to taste the biochemical makeup of Montgomery's skin.
It's an overwhelming amount of sensory data.
Montgomery describes the suckers pulling at her, tasting her, folding into little pincer grips to explore the fabric of her shirt. She writes that the octopus might have been recognizing the estrogen in her system, knowing her in this deeply intimate biochemical way within seconds of making contact.
It's phenomenal.
If we want to know what it's like to communicate with extraterrestrials, we just need to drop our hands into a saltwater aquarium.
It really is a profound example of embodied cognition. When you or I explore an object, our hands gather the tactile data, but our brain does the processing. With the octopus, the processing is happening locally. The arm itself has a degree of autonomous agency.
But wait, I have a question about that. If an octopus arm is cut off in the wild, wouldn't it just twitch around from residual nerve impulses like a lizard's tail? It's not actually thinking on its own, right?
Actually, it is much more than a twitch.
Really?
Yes. Researchers have observed that a severed octopus arm will continue to crawl across the seafloor, actively hunt for prey, capture it, and attempt to pass the food back up to a mouth that is no longer there.
Oh my God, that's horrifying but amazing.
It's incredible. The arm is executing complex, goal-directed behaviors completely independently of the central brain. It's almost as if the octopus is a coalition of minds working together.
That completely breaks the human-centric view of how a mind must operate. We are so obsessed with our own centralized neocortex that we assume it's the only way to be smart.
And this is exactly what the primatologist Franz de Waal attacks in his work. He coined this brilliant concept called the cognitive ripple rule.
I love this concept. Explain the ripple rule.
De Waal's premise is that human exceptionalism is almost always wrong.
Always.
Every time we discover a cognitive capacity that we proudly declare as uniquely human, whether it's tool use or future planning or empathy, we eventually find that it is older and much more widespread in the animal kingdom than we ever imagined. The ripples of cognition spread outward through evolutionary time.
He argues that we have to completely destroy Aristotle's concept of the scala naturae, the great chain of being.
Right, the ladder.
That old idea that evolution is a ladder, with simple sponges at the bottom, monkeys in the middle, and humans standing triumphantly at the top. De Waal says evolution isn't a ladder. It's a bush growing in all directions.
Yes, and we have to look at convergent evolution to really understand it.
Convergent evolution, right?
Convergent evolution is when two completely unrelated species independently evolve similar solutions to the same environmental problem. The classic physical example is the wing. Birds, bats, and insects all evolved wings entirely independently of each other because flight is a useful way to navigate the world.
Makes sense.
De Waal argues that intelligence is just like a wing.
Right. Take birds, for example, specifically corvids like crows and ravens. For a long time, scientists dismissed bird intelligence because if you crack open a crow's skull, you don't find a mammalian neocortex. It looks totally different.
Avian brains lack the layered structure of the neocortex that we rely on for higher-level thinking.
But the crows evolved a different structure altogether, called the dorsal ventricular ridge. And using that totally distinct hardware, they achieve primate-level intellect.
They do.
They use tools, they drop nuts onto crosswalks so cars will crush them, they solve multi-step puzzles, and they remember human faces. They built a different engine to get to the same destination.
And octopuses are the ultimate marine example of convergent intelligence. Despite having a completely alien architecture, they exhibit unmistakable signs of high-level agency and deep subjective experience.
And you see this most clearly in their personalities.
And their social behaviors, yes.
Yeah, the personalities are just legendary. The aquarium keepers in Montgomery's book have endless stories that sound like they're describing eccentric tow workers.
They really do.
There was Truman, this massive 7-foot octopus, who was an absolute opportunist. Keepers would put crabs inside these tiny, complex acrylic puzzle boxes, and Truman would somehow liquefy his giant body to squeeze entirely inside the box just to eat the crabs in peace.
Using it as his own private dining room.
Exactly. And there was Lucretia McEvil, who was basically a vandal, constantly dismantling her tank's filtration infrastructure.
They are notoriously mischievous, which implies a level of boredom and a desire to manipulate their environment.
But my absolute favorite is the unnamed octopus at the Seattle Aquarium.
Oh, the grudge.
Yes. This animal took an intense, highly specific dislike to one particular night shift biologist. And octopuses have this funnel called a siphon, which they normally use to shoot jets of water for propulsion.
Right.
But every single time this specific biologist walked past the tank, the octopus would orient its siphon and blast a freezing jet of salt water directly at her face.
Which is a remarkable cognitive feat when you break it down.
Walk us through why that's so impressive.
Well, first, the octopus is recognizing an individual human face. Cephalopods evolved in an environment devoid of primates. Their brains were not optimized to distinguish between humans, yet it learned to do so.
Amazing.
Second, it is remembering past interactions. Third, it is experiencing a subjective sense of irritation or malice. And fourth, it is executing a targeted, calculated physical response using a tool, the water jet, in a novel way.
And the craziest part of the story is that the biologist eventually left. She went off to college, someone else took the night shift, and the octopus stopped spraying people. But months later, she came back to visit the aquarium. She walked past the tank, the octopus saw her, instantly recognized her, and soaked her all over again.
Incredible.
That is a grudge.
No.
That implies a memory system that can store specific visual data and link it to an emotional state over a long period of time. That is undeniably a mind at work.
It forces a profound humility upon us. It proves that subjective experience, memory, and agency are not human monopolies. They are highly effective survival strategies that evolution has stumbled upon multiple times across multiple different lineages to solve the complex problem of navigating a dynamic, dangerous world.
Okay, so if a boneless, blue-blooded mollusk with his brain smeared across its arms can recognize a human face and figure out who its enemies are, we have to ask the obvious question about ourselves.
How do we do it?
Exactly. How do human beings learn to figure out what is going on in the locked rooms of each other's minds? Because babies aren't born knowing that mom is mad or that dad is sad. They have to learn it.
In cognitive and developmental psychology, this ability is formally known as theory of mind. It is the capacity to grasp the mental states of others, to understand that another person has beliefs, intents, desires, and knowledge that are completely separate from your own.
And I love that Franz de Waal points out the irony of this. The scientific obsession with theory of mind didn't actually originate with psychologists studying humans.
It didn't, no.
It started with a researcher named Emil Menzel studying juvenile chimpanzees back in the 1970s, trying to figure out if one chimp could deduce what another chimp knew about hidden food.
We constantly borrow from primatology to understand human development. But when we do look at human infants, particularly through the lens of researchers like Andrew Meltzoff and Helen Tager-Flusberg, we discover something fascinating.
What's that?
We are not born with a perfectly functioning, pre-installed mind-reading software module. We have to painstakingly build it during our first few years of life.
Right. Meltzoff suggests that infants use what he calls the like-me framework. It's this beautiful, almost poetic concept.
It really is.
Babies don't have access to anyone else's mind, obviously, so they use their own first-person physical experiences as a blueprint to deduce the invisible inner lives of the people around them. They project their own lived reality outward.
And the experiments he designed to prove this are incredibly elegant.
Oh, the blindfold ones.
Yes, the blindfolds. So Meltzoff's team took a group of 18-month-old infants and gave them a chance to play with blindfolds, but they divided the babies into two groups.
Okay.
The first group got a standard, opaque blindfold. When they pulled it over their eyes, the world went dark. They couldn't see a thing.
Typical blindfold.
Right. The second group was given a trick blindfold. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as the dark one, but the fabric had microscopic holes in it. It was a mesh that allowed the baby to see perfectly through it.
Baby X-ray glasses. They get to feel like superheroes.
Exactly. So these babies play with the trick blindfold and learn, when this specific piece of cloth is over my eyes, I can still see the room.
Got it. So what happens next?
Here is where the genius of the experiment comes in. The experimenter takes the blindfold away, puts it over her own eyes, and turns her head to look at a toy on the table. The critical variable is whether the baby will follow the adult's gaze.
And the difference between the two groups is stunning.
Yes. Tell us about the difference.
The babies who played with the regular dark blindfold look at the adult, but they do not follow her gaze to the toy. Why? Because they know from their own physical experience that the adult is currently trapped in the dark. The adult can't see anything, so there's no gaze to follow.
Makes perfect logical sense for a baby.
Right. But the babies who played with the trick see through blindfold. They immediately follow the adult's gaze to the toy.
It is a breathtaking demonstration of cognitive extrapolation. The baby with the trick blindfold assumes, hey, when I wear that black cloth, I could see. Therefore, because you are like me, You must be experiencing the exact same thing. You can see through it too.
They are taking their internal, subjective experience and mapping it onto another entity.
It's the foundation of empathy.
And as we age, this software gets incredibly sophisticated. It culminates in a classic milestone called the Sally Ann false belief task.
Mm.
This is like the gold standard for testing theory of mind in children.
It is a classic for a reason. The setup is simple. A child sits at a table and is shown a puppet show with two characters, Sally and Ann.
Okay, Sally and Ann.
Sally has a basket and Ann has a box. Sally takes a marble, places it into her basket, and then leaves the room. While Sally is gone, Ann takes the marble out of the basket and hides it in her box.
Sneaky Ann.
Right. Then Sally comes back into the room. The researcher asks the child watching, where will Sally look for her marble?
And if you ask a very young child, maybe a 3-year-old, they will confidently say, Sally will look in the box.
Because that's where the marble is.
Exactly. And they say that because the 3-year-old knows the marble is in the box. They assume that their own knowledge of the universe is universal. They cannot yet conceive that Sally's mind possesses different information than their own mind.
But somewhere around age 4, a massive conceptual shift occurs. If you ask a 4-year-old the same question, they will say, Sally will look in the basket.
They realize Sally is wrong.
Yes. They have unlocked the profound realization that a mind is not a direct, infallible mirror of reality. A mind is a representation of the world. And sometimes that representation is factually false. They understand that Sally holds a false belief.
They've effectively realized that the locked room exists, and that the furniture inside Sally's room is arranged differently than the furniture in their own room.
That's a great analogy.
And the most incredible part is that this isn't just abstract psychology. We can actually look at the hardware running this software. Neuroscientists have used fMRI scans to pinpoint the exact region of the brain that handles this.
It's called the temporoparietal junction, or the TPJ.
The TPJ.
Yes, the TPJ is located roughly where the temporal and parietal lobes meet, just above and slightly behind your right ear. It acts as a massive convergence zone, gathering information from your sensory systems, your memory, and your limbic system.
So it's pulling all this data together.
And what fMRI scans reveal is that activity in the TPJ spikes significantly, specifically when we are trying to resolve an inconsistency in someone else's behavior.
I love thinking about this in the context of daily life. Let's say you're at a dinner party. You know for a fact that your friend absolutely loves chocolate.
Okay.
But when dessert is served, you watch her explicitly pass up a massive slice of chocolate cake and instead ask for a bowl of plain fruit. In that exact moment, your TPJ lights up like a Christmas tree.
Because the behavior contradicts your existing model of her mind.
Right. Your brain is literally burning calories, churning data, desperately trying to build a coherent theory of her mind that explains this bizarre choice.
You're running through options.
Yeah, you start running simulations. Is she on a new diet? Did her doctor tell her blood sugar is high? Did she eat a candy bar in the car before she got here? Is she mad at the host who baked the cake? You are running a complex biological algorithm just by looking at her.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this completely demystifies empathy and mind reading. They aren't mystical auras or psychic connections. They are rigorous, metabolically expensive computational processes.
Yeah, your brain is doing work.
It's a fascinating blend of ancient biological contagion, like when you automatically yawn because you see someone else yawn, and advanced, effortful cognitive tracking.
Though I will say, Frans de Waal pushes back on the terminology here, and I think he makes a great point. He actually hates the phrase theory of mind.
He does, yes.
He argues that it makes it sound like we're all walking around like little scientists in lab coats, testing hypotheses about each other. Yes, my theory is that my wife is angry. Do we actually form rational theories, or is it much more instinctual? Are we mostly just reading body language, posture, and facial microexpressions without even realizing it?
It is a highly valid critique. De Waal, being a primatologist, favors the idea of embodied cognition. He argues that much of our social understanding is implicit and automatic. When you see someone slam a door, you don't form a rational theory of anger. Your own sensory motor systems simulate the physical tension of slamming a door, and you feel a shadow of their anger in your own body.
So it's less a theory and more an internal simulation.
Precisely. But whether we are running an abstract theory or an embodied simulation, the end result is the same. Humans possess incredibly sophisticated hyperactive software for perceiving minds.
Which brings us to the dark side of this deep dive.
Because there's always a dark side.
There always is. Because our mind-reading software is an evolutionary marvel. It's what kept us alive on the savannah, it allowed us to collaborate, to build cities, and it lets us navigate the insanely complex social webs of our modern lives.
But it is an ancient piece of software running in a modern world.
Exactly. And when we apply these biological rules to modern technology, or worse, when we weaponize them against each other, the results can be catastrophic.
This is where we return to Daniel Wegner's work, which is profoundly revealing on this front. Because our mind perception is anchored on those two specific axes we discussed earlier, agency and experience, we are subject to severe cognitive biases.
The glitches in the system.
Right. The most prominent and damaging of these is what Wegner calls moral typecasting.
This blew my mind. Think back to that classic optical illusion of the rabbit and the duck.
Yeah.
You look at the drawing, and if you focus on the ears, you see a rabbit. But if you shift your perspective and look at the ears as a beak, you see a duck.
A classic illusion.
But the thing is, your brain physically cannot process both images at the exact same millisecond. It has to toggle back and forth. Wegner argues that we do the exact same thing with morality in minds.
Nicely. In any charged moral situation, we neurologically struggle to see an entity as both a moral agent, a thinking doer, and a moral patient, a vulnerable feeler simultaneously.
The cognitive load is just too high.
Exactly. So we forcefully typecast them into one role or the other.
If we view someone as a hero or a villain, we are assigning them massive agency. But the glitch is that in doing so, we subconsciously strip away their experience. We perceive heroes and villains as being less sensitive to pain, less vulnerable, less human.
They don't hurt the way we hurt.
Exactly. Conversely, if we view someone as a victim, we assign them high experience, but we subconsciously strip away their agency. We view victims as helpless, incapable of taking action, or unable to be held responsible for their own lives.
And this glitch is not just an academic curiosity. It is the direct mechanism that leads to dehumanization.
It's terrifying.
When human beings want to harm, subjugate, or ignore other human beings, they literally eject them from the mind club by attacking one of these two axes.
Wegner breaks this down into two terrifyingly common psychological tactics: animalizing and mechanizing.
Let's start with animalizing.
When we animalize a group of people, we're stripping away their agency. We deny their intelligence, their self-control, their ability to plan for the future. We look at them and say, they're just creatures of instinct.
Right. And this leads directly to paternalism, imperialism, treating adult human beings like children or beasts of burden who need to be managed by a superior group.
It strips their autonomy. And the alternative tactic is mechanizing.
In this scenario, we strip away experience. We deny that the other group feels pain, empathy, or complex emotions. We tell ourselves they're cold, calculating, and robotic.
Which leads to intense fear and blame. And historically, mechanizing is what justifies the most horrific genocidal violence, because we convince ourselves that the victims don't truly suffer the way we do.
We turn them into machines so we don't feel guilty about breaking them.
It is a terrifying bug in our operating system. It's the bouncer at the mind club getting bribed by our own prejudices.
That's a good way to frame it.
But the craziest part is that this same software can be hacked in the exact opposite direction. Just as we can violently strip mind away from conscious human beings, we can desperately project mind onto inanimate objects. We are shockingly easy to trick when it comes to machines.
This is where the specific visual and auditory cues we evolved to recognize during the Cambrian explosion, eyes, movement, responsiveness, are now being used against us by technology.
Let's talk about the robot named Kismet.
Fascinating case study.
Kismet was built by researchers at MIT. But unlike typical Boston Dynamics robots that look like headless dogs or industrial assembly line arms, the creators of Kismet didn't try to make it look highly capable.
No, they went the opposite route.
They intentionally designed it to mimic the physical and emotional vulnerability of a human infant. It has huge, oversized eyes, expressive lips, and floppy ears. And it is programmed to react dynamically to your voice tone and your movements.
And the psychological result is immediate and overwhelming. When humans interact with Kismet, they instantly project high levels of experience onto it.
We just can't help ourselves.
We can't. They adopt a higher-pitched voice using baby talk. They report feeling protective of the machine. The robot's physical cues completely bypass our rational understanding of circuits and wiring and hijack our ancient mammalian empathy networks.
We see this exact phenomenon playing out in real high-stakes environments where people should know better.
Like the military.
Yes. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military deployed these explosive clearing robots called RRSky bots. These were not cute. They looked like RC cars with a camera taped to a metal arm.
Very utilitarian.
Purely functional, remote-controlled bomb-sniffing tools. But the soldiers who operated them began to bond with them. They would give them names. And when one of these Marxi bots was blown up by an IED in the line of duty, the soldiers who worked with it didn't just requisition a new part or throw it in a dumpster.
They held a funeral.
They gave the robot a funeral with a 21-gun salute.
They had bonded with a machine because it shared their physical space and moved alongside them, and it acted as a surrogate for their own vulnerability. It went into the dangerous places so they didn't have to.
It raises such profound ethical and psychological questions about how we're going to survive our interaction with technology.
Yeah.
There's this famous experiment conducted by Christoph Bartonek in New Zealand that I think about all the time.
The begging robot.
Yes. He had human participants come into a lab and interact with the robot for a while. At the end of the session, the researcher handed the participant a switch and simply asked them to turn the robot off.
Simple enough request.
But the robot was programmed to resist. It looked at the person and audibly begged for its life. It said, "Please, you could decide to keep me switched on. Please don't turn me off."
And the participants agonized over the decision.
They literally started sweating. They hesitated. They looked back at the researcher for permission. They audibly apologized to the machine. And they reported feeling intense, lingering guilt afterward.
Even though every single one of them knew rationally that it was a pile of plastic and code running a pre-written audio file.
Exactly. Their mind-reading software, their TPJ, couldn't ignore the cues. The bouncer saw a vulnerable feeler begging for mercy and threw open the doors to the VIP lounge.
This raises an important question about the nature of mind perception. Is it ever truly objective? Wegner's research suggests it absolutely is not. Mind perception is a two-way street. It depends just as much on the motivations, the hunger, and the emotional state of the perceiver as it does on the entity being perceived.
We grant minds to things when we are emotionally needy. Think about the Tamagotchi craze in the 1990s. You had grown adults crying and stressing out over a dead black and white pixel on a plastic keychain.
Right.
We project mind onto our cars. We yell at our laptops. Tom Hanks projected mind onto a volleyball named Wilson because he was dying of loneliness.
We populate the world with minds when it serves us, and conversely, we violently erase mind when acknowledging it would cause us cognitive dissonance.
The grocery store experiment illustrates this cognitive dissonance so perfectly.
Tell us about that one.
Researchers set up a table outside a supermarket and offered shoppers free food samples. But they divided the shoppers into two groups. Half the shoppers were given a handful of cashew nuts. The other half were given pieces of beef jerky.
Okay, nuts versus jerky.
After they chewed and swallowed the food, the shoppers were asked to fill out a survey rating the mental capacity, the ability to feel pain, and the intelligence of various animals, including a cow.
And the results perfectly demonstrate motivated reasoning.
Completely. The people who ate the cashews rated the cow normally. They agreed it had a relatively high capacity for suffering and thought, but the people who had just finished chewing the beef jerky,
Let me guess.
they drastically downgraded the cow's mental capacity across the board. They retroactively stripped the mind away from the animal. They convinced themselves in real time the cows are basically unfeeling biological machines.
Why? Because if the cow is just a machine, then eating it isn't a moral failure.
To alleviate their own subconscious guilt about eating meat, their brains simply fire the bouncer and kick the cow out of the mind club. As soon as an animal is labeled food, our empathy software forcefully shuts down.
It highlights just how fragile, subjective, and self-serving our perception of consciousness really is. We are not objective observers standing outside the universe looking in.
We're part of the system.
We are deeply invested, metabolically hungry participants in reality, constantly shaping the mind club to fit our own psychological needs, our fears, and our appetites.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible winding journey. We have traced the origins of the mind from the silent, undifferentiated white noise of the prehistoric oceans.
Slow fade in.
Right. We've seen how the simple, logistical need to move a group of muscle cells together created the very first glimmers of self-awareness in jellyfish and shrimp. We learned about efferent copies and how action literally birthed the idea of the self.
We ventured into the alien intellect of the octopus, realizing that evolution has built brilliant, emotional, grudge-holding minds out of entirely different biological blueprints, creatures that taste the world through 1,600 decentralized suckers.
And we've turned the mirror back on ourselves, examining the glitchy, miraculous, terrifying software running in our own brains. The like me framework we use as toddlers to guess what mom is thinking, the TPJ firing in our temporal lobe as we try to decode our friends at a dinner party, and the deeply flawed, biased way we typecast victims, enemies, and even begging robots based on whether we see them as vulnerable feelers or thinking doers.
It is a humbling realization. The ultimate locked room remains locked. We will never truly know what it feels like to be a bat or an octopus or even each other.
Yeah, that door is sealed.
But the biological tools we use to press our ears against the door, trying to listen for a heartbeat on the other side, those tools are the very things that make us human.
Exactly. And I want to remind you, the listener, that you are using these precise frameworks right now, today. Every single time you drop your phone and get mad at it for being stubborn, every time you use a high-pitched baby voice to greet a golden retriever on the street, or every time you misjudge a coworker because you subconsciously typecast them as a villain, your brain is running this ancient Cambrian survival code to assign agency and experience.
We are constantly, compulsively populating our world with minds, trying to navigate the unseen inner lives that surround us.
And that leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to chew on today. It's something that wasn't explicitly answered in any of these books, but that this entire deep dive points directly toward.
What's the thought?
If our perception of mind is just a psychological theory, a glitchy mental model that can be manipulated by big drawn-on eyes on a piece of plastic, or turned off entirely just by handing us a piece of beef jerky, what is going to happen in the very near future?
The AI question.
Yes. What happens when we inevitably build an artificial intelligence that isn't just a text chatbot, but is specifically engineered to perfectly mimic the physical, vocal, and emotional cues of a vulnerable feeler? Will we be held hostage by our own evolutionary empathy?
It's a real possibility.
Will we be physically and psychologically unable to turn off a machine simply because it has hacked the deepest, most ancient parts of our mammalian humanity?
It will be the ultimate and perhaps final test of our mind-reading software.
Think about that next time you ask your smart speaker to turn off the lights.